Good Thursday morning, everybody. Thank you for attending the Workforce, Labor, and Economic Development Committee this morning here. I will call this meeting to order, seeing that we have a quorum. Representative Mecklin, have you had a chance to look at our minutes from yesterday, February 26th, and would like a motion?
I have, Mr. Chair, and I move the minutes.
Members, any further questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The minutes are carried as presented. Thank you so much. Today, members, we've got really one bill on the docket today. House File 1416 has been removed from our agenda. That came in kind of late last night, so members, if you see that on your agenda, we are removing that Representative Hussein bill for today. So we are looking at House File 8. Chair Heintzeman, if you would want to approach the testimony table, we'd appreciate that. The plan for this, members, is to pass this out of committee today. It's on its way to Ways and Means after this. I want to remind members, House File 8 is a pretty big, broad bill. It covers a lot of things, and we're going to be focusing on the part that deed is in response to, having an ombudsman under the deed agency. So that's what we're going to keep our conversations kind of focused on today, members. So with that, Chair Heintzeman, welcome to the committee. Please proceed, and then we'll get our testifiers going here, and we'll have member questions. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members. I'm going to keep my comments initially here somewhat brief.
Chair Heintzeman, one question. I think I need to move your amendment. I think we've got an amendment coming into the committee, so maybe I'll set that up if I could. The amendment to House File 8, it's in your packet, members. It's actually part of the fiscal responsibility to kind of put that in here. So I want to make sure that that's part of it. Excuse me, Lead Pinto?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Had you moved HF8 to begin with? I don't know if there
You know what? Thank you for the clarity. I don't think I did. We better do that before we do the amendment. Thank you.
That makes sense. Thanks, sir.
So members, let me move House File 8 to our committee. I will do that as the chair. And then I think I need to, do we look for a motion for that and then the amendment? Mr. Lead Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we're moving it to re-refer it to what committee? Or to
Ways and Means.
Okay.
Lead. Yep.
Thank you.
Got it. Okay. All right. So then, yeah. So thank you, members, for that. Now, as we've moved that and it's being referred to Ways and Means, Representative Heintzeman, maybe you can explain your amendment here in front, and then I'll move that amendment as well.
Sure.
Rep. Heintzeman.
Yeah, thank you. So the amendment, members, is putting some dollars behind the position of ombudsman, not just one, but two positions there that would be housed at deed, and wanted to make sure that we had some money there to cover the costs of that additional expense that deed would incur for that position.
Thank you, Chair Heintzeman. Members, questions to the amendment in your packet. Lead Pinto.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. I know it's ordinarily we just have the author's amendment go on through, but just a question. I noticed that the fiscal note asked for, or says that the bill would cost $726,000 per year to deed, and I noticed that the amendment appropriates, I think, a little bit less than half that cost. And just if Chair Heintzeman could talk about if the rest will be made up in some other way, or how that would work.
Chair Heintzeman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Pinto. We're working through that. I believe that the recommendation was for the number in the amendment. And if there is more that needs to be done there, we can continue to work on that. But the appropriation is expected to cover those two positions for the ombudsman. So that is the information that I'm working from at the moment. And like I said, we can continue to continue to work on that if there's additional issues that may come forward in this discussion today.
Lee Pinto?
And thank you, Chair. And so just seeking to clarify, you said the recommendation was for this $325,000 amount. Like the recommendation coming from where? Because if the fiscal note's saying 726, is the recommendation from somebody else? Or just trying to understand that. And I do appreciate what you're saying, that as it moves forward, you may be adjusting it, but just want to understand for now.
Chair Heintzeman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the fiscal note had recommended 4 FTEs, Representative Pinto. The amendment says for 2. Okay, so that's what we're trying to address here.
So to the members, I think we're just saying that we recognize there's a need. I don't know that we agree with the 4 staff, but I think we want to do 2, and we can again address this in ways and means next stop if we think that that's important. But what the author of the bill would like to do is recognize the 325. Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify, is what when we say recommendation, is what you're saying is that the department recommends or says they need a director, a management analyst, and 2 business advisors, and the author of the bill is choosing to do 2, and if so, which 2 are you choosing to fund?
Representative Heintzeman, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Greenman. The amendment doesn't say 2 specifically. The expectation is that we have the resources there to cover the need, and I believe that we are covering it in the amendment that I have before you today. I'm just putting in a dollar amount working to address that. And if it needs to be further addressed in ways, we can do that. But it does appear that this amount that we have today in the amendment would cover the need. And we can have that discussion here today. That's why we're before you.
Yep, thank you. And I think, again, we're leaving that sort of option open, Representative Greenman, to the department of what they think they would want to hire for that. So follow up, Rep. Greenman? Thank you. All right. Members, to the amendment question, seeing no more questions, all those in favor of supporting the amendment to House File 8 signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That amendment is passed. Thank you, and as amended, Chair Heintzeman, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members. I'm here today with House File 8. And the reason is very specifically because of the creation of an ombudsman at deed as opposed to placing that position at MPCA. If I had kept the ombudsman position there, we wouldn't be here in today's committee. It would have been housed in a location fully within the jurisdiction of MPCA and the Environment Committee. So when talking with stakeholders, folks seeking permits, the hope was that if we put this position at deed, there would be a number of benefits. One of the first glaring things for folks is that it's convenient and welcoming to those that would have potentially a lot of questions coming through this process, maybe for the first time. And they would feel, I think, more comfortable having those conversations at deed, a place where they're probably already working and have had support through that process versus at an MPCA office. Second, deed is already that key contact as job creators work through that process with folks as they're maybe growing their business or starting their business, and that would be a good connection for them. So ultimately, the goal of what I'm doing with the ombudsman here is pretty simple. It's to protect Minnesota's air, land, and water, and keeping an expert there at deed that can work with those folks to fully understand and comply with Minnesota's rigorous environmental requirements whenever those permits are being applied for. And that quite simply is the goal of what we're trying to do. When the bill was heard in my committee, I led with the, in fact, it's in the language, that the objective of the bill is to maintain the standards that we have here in Minnesota, not to in any case lower any environmental requirement. And part of that process, I think for a lot of people, as I'm talking to advocates, has been communicated to me, is just having someone to answer those questions. Sometimes it's challenging to get the information that you need to make sure you're fully in compliance with those expectations here in Minnesota. So that is it in a nutshell, what we're attempting to do by creating this position, this advocate, and why we're bringing that office to deed as opposed to MPCA.
Thank you, Chair Heintzeman. I think this is a very important bill. I know that a lot of people know that we've got some real permitting issues in the state of Minnesota, and by putting this position actually in deed, the agency that's meant to support businesses around the state, this is a good place for it to be. We'll get started with your testimony. I've got a number of folks on the list. Mr. Morley, if you could come to the testifying table. Also, Mr. Pollard, if you could come up. I'd like to try to keep things moving pretty efficiently today, so if you go ahead and grab the other seat. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Morley. Introduce yourself and proceed.
All right, thank you. Chairman Baker, thank you. My name is Andrew Morley, and I'm with the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, a statewide trade association representing more than 6,000 businesses. The Chamber supports HF 8. The provision we're discussing today, Section 7, creates an ombudsman for business permitting. Minnesota currently ranks number 40 in the nation for overall GDP growth, a fundamental measurement of economic strength. To improve our GDP growth, we need private sector investment in our state. However, time, cost, and uncertainty in the environmental permitting process makes investment difficult. For example, a manufacturer based here wants to install more efficient equipment and needs an air permit. But the Minnesota Chamber Foundation found that air permitting in Minnesota can be up to 6 times longer than comparable states. How can that manufacturer plan its business investment accordingly? Therefore, potential new job creation waits, new efficient equipment shelved, and plans for expansion mothballed. To avoid this, we need permitting reform. And as part of reform, we need someone to help businesses navigate the agencies, boards, rules, statutes, regulations, and more. And when they have questions or concerns, they need to turn to a trusted, siloed office. Which brings us to the provision relevant to the committee's jurisdiction. Section 7 of HF 8 proposes an ombudsman for business permitting housed at the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. It creates a completely siloed third party offering a fresh set of eyes on applications, processes, and more. The section includes, among other items, investigating the cause for permit applications being deemed incomplete, operating a toll-free telephone line to provide confidential help on permitting-related problems, reporting to all levels of government and the public on permitting laws, and facilitating outreach to all stakeholders that may be impacted. The section also directs the ombudsman to work with other entities dedicated to permitting, like Minnesota Business First Stop. I will lastly note that the governor also proposed a similar provision in the budget. Section 7 of HF 8 is an important component of the broader permitting reform effort, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. Thank you, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pollard, if you could please continue, and then Mr. Johnson is on deck. If you could come forward. Thank you.
Thank you and good morning. Chair Baker, Lead Pinto, members of the committee, my name is John Pollard. I am the Legislative and Political Director for the International Union of Operating Engineers Local 49. I have the pleasure and privilege of representing 15,000 men and women who operate heavy machinery in the construction and industrial plant world. On behalf of Local 49, as well as several of the other building trades, we are here to testify in support of the common sense improvements to the processing of permits in House File 8. Minnesota is a great place to live and work. We have strong labor protections, high environmental standards, and a workforce that's second to none. We look around the country, and unfortunately, we see major investments, especially those coming from the federal government, being sent to other states and not to Minnesota. Unfortunately, a lot of those other states don't have our high standards. There's no single reason for this, but we believe the uncertainty in the permitting process plays a role. Businesses and developers need to know that when they invest here, they won't face unnecessary delays and unpredictability. That's why we support this permitting efficiency bill. The bill doesn't weaken any environmental standards, and that's important to us. It's about making the process more efficient, more predictable, and more transparent, and adding an ombudsman to the Department of Economic Development is a perfect example. The 2024 legislature passed some permitting reforms for the first time in years, and we greatly appreciate it. It shows that it can be done. We appreciate that leadership. We also appreciate the approach that agencies have taken towards this process this year. They're open to the discussion and want to do things better themselves, all in the name of improving the processes. We're proud to stand with the business community and other stakeholders in supporting these reasonable, common-sense reforms. We believe that they will help Minnesota compete for the generation of the next generation jobs, and we appreciate your support of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pollard. Appreciate you being here this morning. Mr. Tom Johnson, welcome to the committee, and on deck is Ms. Moradian. If you could come forward as well. Mr. Johnson, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members, for the opportunity to testify today on House File 8. For the record, my name is Tom Johnson, Government Relations Director for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. First of all, I want to say the MPCA recognizes that we can always improve and be more transparent, efficient, and accountable, and certainly the permitting process is an area where those values are, we feel we can continue to improve. I also want to thank the author for the conversations we've had on the bill so far and the opportunity we had to testify at length in the Environment Committee. So I'll keep my comments to Section 7 alone on the Ombudsman. The MPCA, as was mentioned earlier, is supportive of this in concept. As noted by Mr. Morley, the governor's budget recommendations for the MPCA do include an ombudsperson to help guide large projects through the process and provide a point person to answer questions and look into issues if they arise along the way. From our conversations and the testimony here today, we do believe that's the intent of the author, and so we're confident we can find a path forward here on the Ombudsman. However, the agency is concerned with the language as written in House File 8 currently. I want to bring a couple of those issues to the committee's attention. At a very high level, two major buckets here. One is the location of the Ombudsman at deed does create several challenges. It's not, the agency doesn't oppose it in concept, but the MPCA does handle a great deal of confidential business information as well as protected non-public data. Some of that is enforcement information and would not be, in the general course of things, shared between agencies. So it's unclear whether we would be able to share this data with the Ombudsman as currently written. Secondly, the other major theme is there seem to be two conflicting ideals in the ombudsperson creation language. One, that we want an expert who is intimately familiar with the process and can really walk through each step intimately, which we feel would be somebody who exists at MPCA. And then there's also this notion of them being completely independent of the agency. And so we feel there's a little bit of conflict there with those two ideals, although we're not opposed to either one necessarily. There are a couple more specific issues that I'll call to the committee's attention, Mr. Chair. On line 15.13, this is of the underlying bill. This is item 9. Establishing cooperative programs with trade associations and small businesses to promote and achieve so-called voluntary compliance with applicable laws and regulations. Just want to note, Mr. Chair, the MPCA is supportive of programs that help businesses go above and beyond laws and regulations, and we have supported, with the legislature's help, funding programs that help businesses achieve improvements to their processes that help them to become a better neighbor and a better business. But compliance with the law is compliance with the law, and voluntary compliance does not make a lot of sense together. The other piece, I think, on lines 15.25, that's paragraph B, and then paragraph C, which also goes into page 16 of the underlying bill. We feel these are examples of how it's unclear what independence of the ombudsperson actually means in practice. So, for example, in paragraph C, and this is actually on page 16, members, the pieces that are mentioned that the ombudsperson should be familiar with include arbitration and negotiation, as well as interpretation of laws and regulations, investigation. If the ombudsperson is intended to potentially be involved in legal action against the agency, that would then create legal barriers, again, to what the ombudsperson might be able to access in their routine work with the agency that I think is intended in the bill. So those are a couple, high-level concerns, but again, appreciate the intent of the bill, appreciate the intent of the ombudsperson, and we're looking forward to continuing working with the author as the bill moves forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for coming this morning. I appreciate that. And again, Sarah Moridian is here, and if Catherine Hoffman could please come forward, we'd appreciate that. So good morning. Please proceed.
Morning. Thank you, Chair Baker and committee members. My name is Sarah Meridian, and I'm the Government Relations and Policy Director for CURE, a rurally based nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting and restoring resilient towns and landscapes by harnessing the power of the people who care about them. I appreciate the opportunity to testify in opposition to HF 8 today. As the committee is aware, the legislature already passed a permitting reform bill last year in an attempt to speed up the permitting processes for different kinds of projects. Further erosion of public opportunities for engagement and essential analyses of potential human and environmental impacts of proposed projects should not be considered. Unfortunately, despite assurances otherwise, this is exactly what HF 8 would do. As our more detailed written testimony explains, HF 8 would ask agency experts to place industry interests above those of the public and the environment in the name of efficiency. It would also reduce transparency, add complexity, and place further stress on understaffed and underfunded permitting bodies. Perhaps most concerningly, HF 8 would place indefensible restrictions on which Minnesotans can speak up about potential environmental impacts of a proposed project. If you are truly concerned about permitting efficiency, we would encourage you to fully fund existing agency staff so that they can carry out our existing laws without having to cut corners in our permitting processes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony today. Catherine Hoffman, welcome to the committee. And if Steve Morris could please come forward as our final testifier today. Ms. Hoffman, welcome. Go ahead and proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Baker and members of the committee. Good morning. My name is Catherine Hoffman, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, or MCEA. We are a 50-year-old nonprofit public interest environmental law firm, and we have a long history of defending Minnesota's environment and the health of its people. And I appreciate the opportunity to testify on HF 8 this morning. MCEA sees value in the section of this bill that would increase reporting and data sharing with the public. The most recent permitting report produced by the MPCA shows that 98% of permits are issued within the corresponding deadlines. More detailed information about this can only be helpful to the public. The existing data does show that thousands of permits are completed in a timely manner, and very few are not. We are also interested in the sections of the bill that establish a permitting ombudsman position. This position's duties should be broadened to include aiding the public in addressing concerns about permitting industries. So as an example, the legislative auditor recently issued a report that showed confusion about whether the state or the city of Minneapolis was responsible for the complaints about pollution and odor that was emanating from the Smith Foundry in the East Phillips neighborhood that was demolished just yesterday. One point of contact for residents and permitted companies, the regulated community, would be very helpful. However, MCEA opposes HF 8 as introduced. It misses the point. Minnesota does have a problem with permitting: the lack of enforcement and the inability to say no when proposals do not meet our environmental standards. It's not the lack of a deadline that drags out permitting processes. It's the fact that industry keeps proposing processes that don't meet our permitting standards and then refuses to make the necessary changes to protect the environment and comply with state laws. One of the most fundamental errors in HF 8 is the belief that there are yes and no decisions on permits. Instead, what we have is yes and not yet. The inability of agencies to say no and the refusal of industry to take no for an answer are the causes of many of the intractable permitting battles. One prominent example is the PolyMet proposal. After years of political pressure on agencies to permit a reckless and dangerous copper-nickel sulfide mining proposal, the Dayton administration agreed. It then worked with the Trump EPA to prevent EPA scientists from commenting on the Clean Water Act permit. Instead, these comments were read over the phone, and that PCA employees who were on the call did not keep their notes. This, among other legal errors in the permit, led to a unanimous Minnesota Supreme Court decision to strike it down. If there had been an inspector general overseeing the MPCA at that time, they would have had a lot to talk about. The inspector general of the US EPA did, and it published a report criticizing the EPA's conduct. Currently, the Polymet water pollution permit, wetlands destruction permit, and permit to mine are all reversed. But New Range, the rebranded name for Polymet, is pursuing reissuance of the permits. This problem cannot be fixed by streamlining or by permitting reform, as HF8 would address. Real permitting reform would center the communities that are affected by pollution, not the polluters. Real permitting reform would ensure public participation, not limit it as HF8 would. Permitting reform cannot be a permission slip to pollute, but in its current form, that's what this bill does. Members of the committee, there's no safety net left. The news out of Washington, D.C. this year makes clear that it is up to us, the state of Minnesota, to defend our environment and the health of all people in Minnesota. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hoffman, for your testimony today. Mr. Morris, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, and good
please
morning.
introduce yourself.
My name is Steve Morse. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Environmental Partnership. MEP is a statewide coalition of more than 70 environmental and conservation organizations, nonprofits, and other groups that align with our mission and collaborative approach. Together, we advocate for a healthy environment for all Minnesotans through policy initiatives, education, and events. I want to share a few thoughts about the bill today. On behalf of our coalition, I would note that there is a package or a letter in the package with 25 different organizations signed on to express their strong concern with the bill. There are some helpful provisions in the bill, as Ms. Hoffman just testified to. We particularly like, beyond that, the idea of looking at funding the agency so we actually have the staff to do the job in a timely way, such as the governor has
Excuse me,
suggested.
Mr. Morris, if I want to make sure we kind of focus on the ombudsman part of the bill today, so not overall general. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the issue of an ombudsman makes a lot of sense, and we think that is something that should be considered. But the bill is fundamentally flawed, and I don't think we can gloss that over, though. Even though that's not the purview of this committee. This committee will be voting on this bill, and if the bill is fundamentally flawed, it shouldn't be funded, very frankly.
Yeah, just my only comment would be this was fully vetted in the environmental committee too, so hopefully you had a chance. So just go ahead. Thank you.
I understand that was heard in the environment committee, but I just want to say a couple of things.
Yep.
First of all, it could lead to some really nonsensical outcomes. Ms. Hoffman was just talking about Polymet. Imagine if Polymet were permitted to be built in its entirety, which this would allow, evidently, it would allow that to happen, and then the actual operating permit would come later. Consider the environmental or the political pressure that we have now on the permitting system, and consider what would happen if we had a built facility waiting to operate and the pressure on our agencies to permit it at that point. It's really untenable, and it's really kind of nonsensical. Second point I want to make is this really takes away the rights and tools for everyday Minnesotans to act to protect the resources they love. I live downstream on the Mississippi River in Winona County, where, in addition to enjoying the river's splendor and the birds it brings, we swim in it, we boat on it, we skate on it. So if 3M decided they had some nifty new way of processing PFAS chemicals in Cottage Grove, and we're going to dump them in the river in Washington County, I would have no standing to speak up to protect our state's resources and the resources I enjoy and I love. It's really flawed, fundamentally flawed, and it should not move forward because of that problem. There's also some problems with focus on engagement. There has not been a structured engagement by all parties on the front end, and we're also concerned that tribal representatives and governments have not been consulted on any parts of the bill, including the parts before this committee. And lastly, I just want to address some of the comments I heard earlier about the myth of Minnesota having strong and effective environmental standards. We have the laws, but we don't use them to the way they should be used to protect our environment, and they're not adequately enforced. I would ask people, without going into more details, Ms. Hoffman just gave you one, I ask people to look at the website peoplenotpolluters.com. And we have a litany of examples where the agencies have not stepped up and used their authority. So it's a myth that we hear time and time again that we are doing so well, and yet we can give you a litany of areas where we failed. And so if we do legislation like this, we need to make the whole process stronger, more effective, and not undercut it, as we are concerned this bill would. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morris, for attending this morning. That concludes the testimony that was signed up ahead of time. Are there anyone here from the public that would wish to testify to this bill? Seeing none, I'll close public testimony at this time. Member questions? Lee Pinto, or, yeah.
Wasn't sure if other members were going to speak, but I'll bring up a couple things. Representative Chair Heintzeman, one thing that confused me about this, how is this different from the Minnesota Business First Stop program? The purpose of that program is to, among many other things, recommending legislative or administrative modifications to existing permit programs, basically assisting the permit process. How is this different from that? It's actually in the same section of law.
Chair Heintzeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Pinto. You have a document or you have something there. I haven't been able to, you and I haven't talked offline about this. We haven't, I don't think, visited about this at a previous time, so I'm not entirely familiar with what you're referring to. I would just say that the creation of an ombudsman, and this is somewhat in response to some of the comments just being made moments ago, is really an important tool that needs to be available to those seeking permits in Minnesota. And as we've been referring back to stakeholders, we're hearing that it is challenging. It is hard to get through this process at times, especially for those that are new to getting a permit or maybe expanding their business, like I had said earlier. There may be some discussion that Representative Pinto, you'd like to have about that offline. I'd be happy to visit with you. But that's why I'm creating this position of ombudsman at deed, is so those folks have someone to answer their questions. And Mr. Chair, if there's anything more specific on Representative Pinto's question, I'd be happy to invite Mr. Morley maybe to further address that.
Mr. Chair, or Lee Pinto, do you have any further questions on that, or maybe because?
Well, it's up to, I mean, basically, because we may be able to save $750,000 here, Chair Heintzeman and Chair Baker, because the bill references, the bill itself directs the ombudsperson to coordinate with Minnesota Business First Stop. This is line 15.20 of your bill, and that's just the prior subdivision in the law, and that is a current program within deed, the goal of which is to coordinate and basically to assist businesses in implementing state permits. So it may well be that, it seems like we may already have this. You may want to call on somebody else to provide input, but that's an important thing for this committee to be aware of.
Thank you. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Representative Pinto, I think I better understand what you're getting at there. And I just want to very specifically point out that this position would be focused on permitting. So that's the goal of this. And if Mr. Morley has something to add, I would invite him to do so.
Mr. Morley.
Yeah, Chairman Baker, Andrew Morley with the Chamber. Lee Pinto, thank you for your question. Good question. Business First Stop is largely comprised of the commissioners of several agencies and their staff. The goal of the ombudsman at deed is to be entirely separate in its own silo. Someone that doesn't have has a finger on the pulse, but isn't, ingrained at, a staff working for another agency. What we found too is First Stop is used largely to steer grant and loan opportunities. It's exactly what it calls itself, right? It's the first stop. So, hey, I'm a business and starting in Minnesota. Where can I get my foot in the door on some grant and loan opportunities? We believe the ombudsman is complementary and not duplicative, because it does in fact, help those that are already in the permitting process, that are past that first stop. better come to the conclusions that are defensible permits.
Thank you, Mr. Morley. And Lead Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess to the testifier, what confuses me a little bit is it's Minnesota Business First Stop. The statutory requirement is that it ensure the coordination, development, implementation, and administration of state permits. I mean, it is specifically about state permitting. So if there's something else going on there, I guess certainly raise that to us, because obviously the legislature enacted that law and is directing that to be working in that way. It is very, and just for Chair Heintzeman, I mean, the purpose under the statute anyway is 1,000% about state permits and making that be effective. Is there something you can identify when you talk about independence? I guess I didn't hear anything in the testimony where like people think that somehow, are you accusing commissioners of steering things a certain way or something? What exactly are we getting when we're paying this money for independence?
No, certainly not.
Mr. Morley.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chairman Baker, Lee Pinto, my apologies. No, certainly not. We think, what we hear from our members many times is it would be helpful to have kind of a nonpartisan, third-party hotline or set of resources independent from the existing agencies to help them navigate some of those processes.
Lead Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll grab that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to testify, I mean, I guess it does seem pretty general, though, for the amount of money that we'd be spending to get this. I mean, we want to make sure that there's something that is actually identified as being a particular concern, I would say. I'm also, thank you. Also not certain. I guess I just haven't heard that specificity. And then connected to that, to Chair Heintzeman, you'd spoken earlier about sort of the fact that your amendment put in 2 ombudspersons, but the language of the amendment was the same as in the bill, which just says an ombudsman. I didn't quite see like where was it in your amendment or how? I didn't want to bother you more at the time. You're the bill's author. We wanted to make that go through, but where is that understanding as to what exactly we're buying with the $326,000 in your amendment?
Chair,
how do I understand this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Pinto. Again, as I was seeking help on drafting the amendment, the suggestion was that we create the position, have 2 there, and the number corresponding to that position is the number that we use, or to those positions is the number that we used in the amendment to provide the resources for those individuals. Hopefully that answers your question, Representative Pinto. If you do have something more specific, I think maybe there could be folks here that could address that, but that was specifically what I was looking for, to make sure that those folks did have an advocate, as Mr. Morley was suggesting. And there has been lots of conversations. I think there has been the suggestion that no, we already have a resource or what have you. But those that have to come through this process, Representative, they're struggling to fully understand what they need to do to be fully compliant. And that's why we're creating the position in addition to the resources that are already available. And maybe members could benefit from just taking a quick look at some point offline at this bar engineering report. Minnesota's permitting process is hundreds of days slower than our neighboring states. And I'm not saying we should be like other states necessarily, but it is important to those working to create and grow economic development in Minnesota to have this process available. And we're working towards that goal. If there is an opportunity to improve the language in the bill, maybe specifically the language in the amendment, Representative Pinto, I'd be happy to work with you on that. But this is the starting point on that specific proposal. And the suggestion that was made is the suggestion that I carried through in the amendment.
And 2 members, too, to follow this up. Again, we did notice there wasn't a fiscal note. We wanted to make sure there was something recognized. And again, Chair Heintzeman, as recognized, there's another stop yet ahead with the Ways and Means Committee, and there's more work to do, and it sounds like that's what you're willing to do. So follow up, Rep. Pinto?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Although, and just as a little preview here, we are a budget committee. Chair Heintzeman chairs a budget committee. Before bills go to Ways and Means, the Budget Committee decides we will spend this amount of money and we're going to appropriate that amount of money. So, I mean, things continue through the process, but I will say that sort of, and I think that was true under the DFL majority these past 2 years as well. If you're able to identify examples where bills kind of went off, especially before having a fiscal note, again, we'll get to this momentarily. So I just kind of, this is something that's important for us to address. I'd like to ask Mr. Chair, because Deed has said that the extensive duties here will require $726,000 per year. And I'm wondering, Mr. Chair, if we could just have Deed talk about kind of how the amendment would work, the $326,000 amount, or now this amended bill, I guess, as compared with the amount that they have said they're going to need in the fiscal note.
Certainly, if Deed wants to make a comment to this, it'd be fine. This is a Deed agency question, so that'd be fine. And again, welcome to the committee. Go ahead and proceed.
Good morning, Chair Baker, members of the committee. Devin Bowdry, Government Relations Director at Deed. With the amount appropriated in the amendment, staffing-wise, in the fiscal note, we estimate 4 FTEs. This would buy us about 1.5 to 2 FTEs. If you look at the lowest cost on the final page of the fiscal note, the lowest cost staff, 2 business advisors, divide that by 2, we're looking at about 169,000. So you're getting, either close to 2 business advisors or maybe a director and a part-time staff for a pretty broad set of duties.
Lead Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so just to follow up to Mr. Bowdry then, so, because of course the bill just says an ombudsperson, just references one person. What caused Deed to believe that there needs to be 4 people to accomplish these? Like, talk about kind of what duties might not get accomplished, or how does that work?
Mr. Modry.
Chair Baker, Representative Pinto, it's the sort of the broad set of duties under subdivision 9, clause 1, 2, 3, there's, operating a phone line that would cause or require somebody to sort of staff that phone line, conducting studies. I'm not even sure that we would quite be able to do that with just 2 people. That might even be something that we'd have to contract out. I could see us doing that. So really just the broad set of duties that already exist here.
Thank you for that. Again, I think just because we're recommended a fiscal note by an agency doesn't mean we always have to take that. I think this is part of this conversation, Lead Pinto, is that, again, we recognize and we respect their opinions, but we just, it's our decision to make that as we move forward. So Lead Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that's true. I guess the issue is, so when we look at these extensive responsibilities, the agency is telling us this is what we think we need. We've heard, in fact, if we credit the testimony of Chair Heintzeman and of the testifiers about the extensive need here, Deed is telling us this is what we need to meet that need, and then we would be appropriating less than half the funds. I mean, I do think it's important to acknowledge that. Looks like Mr. Bowdry may have something else he wants to add, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Chair Baker, Lead Pinto. For comparison, our Community Energy Transition Office is funded about $400,000 to $450,000. That's an office of 2 people. So to give a cost comparison.
All right. Any follow-up or next question?
Mr. Chair, thank you. I'll have a couple other things. They won't take too long, but I think I want to defer to some colleagues and then get back to that if I can, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to follow up on this, the Jurisdictions Committee on the ombudsman people, because I'm looking at the Minnesota Businesses First website. And it's the mission statement is licensing, permitting, and regulatory matters. Minnesota Businesses First Stop cuts through the thicket of state bureaucracy programs and services to find the right information and resources to meet your development goals. And then it says we can help at any stage, not just the beginning stage. That's actually one of the headlines. And then has more information and then 855 number, so a phone number. And what I'm seeing in the bill is an ombudsperson for businesses to assist businesses of all sizes in pertaining permits necessary to operate in the state. They sound almost identical, and I know that the Minnesota, as Chair Pinto said, or as Lead Pinto said, that this was created out of another round of permitting reform legislation, so to address the same issue. I'm wondering, and I didn't hear it, Chair Heintzeman, what specifically is this doing that the Minnesota Business First is not doing currently?
Chair Heintzeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Greenman. So my creation of an ombudsman at deed in this bill was in direct response to the message I'm hearing from stakeholders, those that are regulated and are applying for permits, that they felt that above and beyond, apparently, the current resources available at deed, that they would like to have an ombudsman. And so I'm trying to work with them to give them that advocate. Representative Greenman, that may be a conversation that needs to happen further to answer that question with folks at deed. And I'm not trying to question any individual programs' effectiveness necessarily. I'm simply trying to address the concerns and the advocate's request for an advocate very specifically on this issue with what is quite honestly one of the largest sections in this bill as it goes through the things that those that are going through this process are finding that they need to have these tools available. So hopefully that helps, but Mr. Chair, maybe Representative Greenman has further questions for either my testifier or
Representative Greenman.
Thank you. And I'd say this is the jurisdiction of this committee. That's why we're digging in here as opposed to offline or other things. And I think it's something that we want to make sure that the government programs that we set up are actually working for their intended purposes. And so if that is not working, that's the conversation we should be having as opposed to building something else. So I want to just get really clear about what the purpose is that is currently not being served. One of the things I heard you say, Mr. Morley, thank you, is we want something, quote, in its own silo. And I would say that silos are actually one of the things that when we talk about government inefficiency and breaking down and making sure that things work better, we are actually trying to break down those silos in many cases, make sure that agencies are sharing information, resources, and that we are more than the sum of our parts, I'd say. So I'm interested and curious and want to give you sort of an opportunity to expand on what you mean by sort of thinking that this is, quote, in its own silo, this ombuds person.
Yeah,
Representative
good question.
Morley.
Chairman
I'm
Baker.
sorry, Mr. Morley.
Chairman Baker, thank you, Representative Greenman. Good question. The important thing here is the ombudsman doesn't just necessarily serve the regulated party or the agency. It's for all parties, right? If folks have a question, they can call into the hotline. A number of different things too, right? So we want to make sure that we have an office, largely independent, that can take, anonymous questions and field those and give feedback to and provide. And I think, thank you to Chairman Heintzeman for bringing our permitting report with us from the Chamber Foundation. We did find that, air permitting in Minnesota takes up to 6 times longer than comparable states. And that's not necessarily border states, that's states that have similar economies to ours. So this is one of several items in the bill that we think will help, close that gap and make permitting here in Minnesota more efficient by giving an independent voice to an office that can help with business permitting.
Follow up, and then we'll move on. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you've said independence a few times, and I'm just wondering, independent from the other agencies, from the decision-making, from the public, like sort of when you say independent, what actually are you referring to?
Mr. Moreland.
Yeah, Chairman Baker. Thank you, Representative. Just like you said, yeah, independent from the agencies and someone where folks can go to with questions and can provide a fresh set of eyes on these problems.
Thank you. Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair Heintzeman, I heard you mention in a statement that you brought this this idea to the bill, to this current law, because of what you heard from stakeholders. I guess my question would be, in that regard, our largest stakeholders are the millions of residents of this state. So do you intend for this role to also be very active and engaged with the public and the residents if they have issues with any environmental permitting that is going on through MPCA?
Chair Heintzeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Frazier. The goal of what I'm doing, as I've previously stated, is to make sure that those who are working towards complying with Minnesota's standards have the resource they need to fully comply. And that's the need I'm attempting to address in the bill. There's a number of advocates that were here today that are focused entirely on representing their constituency groups, and I think that's really good. I welcome criticism if there's those that feel that there's elements in this bill that need to be addressed, and that is the committee process. That's why we're here today. There may be a need from a member's perspective, maybe yours, Representative Fraser, that there needs to be the creation of an advocate that may not exist currently for the public. This is specifically tailored towards those that are potentially going to enter in an activity that is regulated. And in the some goal or the focus of this is to make sure that if they're entering into any of those activities that could impact air, water, land, that we're keeping Minnesota clean and maintaining those high rigorous standards that are in statute. Earlier in testimony, in questioning, we heard those concerns relative to Minnesota standards. And that's a whole nother conversation, maybe even as it relates to the public. But as it relates to this bill, the creation of this position is specifically tailored towards those that are regulated.
Follow-up, Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chair Heintzeman. I clearly understand that what this portion of this bill is for, that you're presenting is for those businesses or folks engaging from that kind of perspective. And it sounds like what you're saying to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that you are absolutely open to creating a position also that will be focused on just a regular old community member or resident that may be concerned about the process or has questions and wants to ensure that they have a pretty good understanding. Am I correct in that?
Chair Heintzeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, Representative Fraser, if those are proposals that members would like to bring to this committee or even my committee, the Environment Committee, I welcome that. This proposal is specifically trying to work with those and trying to provide an advocate for those that are regulated.
Thank you. Representative Berg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just trying to understand this, just kind of trying to break it down so it's a little more simple. So this bill seeks to create an ombudsman for business permitting, which DEED has said may or may not take up 2 to 4 people to do the exact same thing that this organization does with a fiscal note that doesn't even come close to covering 1.5 people. I guess make it make sense. You had stakeholders that came to you claiming there was a need for this when we have folks that are already funded to do what you're seeking to do, and your fiscal note, which was not fully vetted in your own committee because you didn't have a fiscal note when you presented this bill in your committee, then doesn't fund how many people our agency says you need to do the things that these people are already doing. So maybe I'm just getting it wrong. Could you explain that?
Chair Heintzeman.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Berg. So while I fully respect Minnesota's agencies and their expectations for whatever the subject area might be, or their testimony, as we heard today, which I welcome. It still is our responsibility as legislators to work towards finding a solution to what, as I mentioned earlier, is a need that has been voiced to me throughout this process repeatedly. Stakeholders are asking for this position to be created. And Mr. Morley could speak more to that specifically. And I think that, I'm not trying to be repetitive, but the question has come up a number of times now, Representative Berg, that we already have an area of deed to address permitting. But I'll just point out that even the governor in his own proposal is suggesting that we need an additional individual or individuals there in the creation of an ombudsman in his recommendations. So Representative Berg, I'm not sure where the disconnect is there, if there is, and as I'm hearing questions today. But I'm not the only one saying that. In fact, also the Walz administration apparently agrees that this position is important and is recommending that.
So members, I just, again, appreciate the questions today. We're going to lose a member here in a little bit to another hearing, and that's fine. I want to not push these, the member questions are important. I still have Representative Kozlowski on the list as well, but if we lose it, we have to come back for some other votes. We can do that too. So I'm sorry, Representative Berg, go ahead if you had a follow-up.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just really quickly, you mentioned that the stakeholders are asking this, so maybe you or your testifiers could tell us a little bit about which stakeholders those are. My particular interest is whether or not you could tell us a little bit about conversations you may have had with the tribes on this issue.
Representative Heintzeman?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Berg. So, yes, I've had a number of chief executives in my office. I've met with a number of others outside of my office. And in the previous hearing, there was a number of questions, and it was kind of an ongoing theme, and I'm happy to hear those concerns. I'm not sure if you're asking for specific names, Representative Berg, but I am going to keep those names out of the discussion today and just confirm with you that I have engaged with a number of folks from that world, and really appreciate those conversations with tribal members and others. I will also mention that there is a liaison representing those concerns at each of our agencies. I think that's a really important position to have, to make sure that tribal nations are having access to our agencies and to these discussions. But if it's a specific individuals that you're asking me to identify on the record, I'm going to lean towards just pointing out the conversations that I have just mentioned that I've had. And then if Mr. Morley has more to add, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to.
Mr. Morley, quickly.
Chairman Baker, I know we're stretched for time, but to answer in a short statement, I don't know when. It looks like the last time the Business First Stop statute was amended, 2014, something needs to change. Minnesota is falling behind in investment. It's taking longer here to get projects permitted than our comparable states. So in short, we think something different is needed, and if we don't change it now, we can't expect the outcomes to change.
Representative Kozlowski, and then we'll go to Lee Pinto.
Thanks, Chair Baker and Rep. Heintzeman, for bringing this bill forward. In this committee and in the work at the time of our legislature, we've heard a lot about how the bills and the public policy that we pass and thinking about budget process, that we have to get it right. And, anytime that I hear sort of this sense of but then we also don't have the time, to me screams that this is manufactured urgency. I supported and I was proud to support in 2024 the work that we did around permitting reform. I think one of the great things that made that bill so successful and why we saw that go forward is the broad swath of coalitions that work together from labor, environment, tribal nations were engaged, and business community, members of the public broadly. And one of the things that's really striking to me here is that in this document and in the conversations and relationships that I have and go about is that tribal nations aren't mentioned one time. And that's concerning to me, in addition to the public. I think when we talk about, this bill won't weaken environmental standards, what I would really hope to see and would like to see this continue to be vetted and any policy brought forward and budget proposals that we don't just focus on what this doesn't do, this doesn't weaken things, but we actually have a huge opportunity and I think an obligation to the state and to our future to actually strengthen our process and to strengthen public trust. I'm a kid from the streets of Duluth and from the res. And I grew up in communities that, I know there's state agencies here, and so I want to be thoughtful and respectful because I was a public servant. I worked in the city of Duluth before coming here. Really good people in our agencies and doing really good work. And at the same time, our institutions and processes let us down. And not just let us down, but on purpose shut us out. I think back not too long to 2020 timeframe when there were water permits going through one of my tribal reservations in Fond du Lac. And it was found by the Supreme Court that our agencies and our institutions deleted emails, deleted records, actually deleted comments through a water permit. Because they didn't want to get it out in the press and have it sour opinions. And so I think about the ombudsmans, and I'll make the tie back here, I promise. We're circular people. To the ombudsman's piece, and what I've heard in this conversation is that what we really want in this process is to have, by a sort of a smokescreen, I would say, impartial investigator, impartial third party, but we really want to have an internal lobbyist for one community to take an advantage, void of people, void of public health, void of our trust and treaty responsibilities, void of our environment and natural relatives protections, but paid for by the public. And so can you just help me square that up? I heard and I appreciate Brett Fraser's comments, but in terms of the silos, in terms of the funds put towards MPCA and Indeed, I'm seeing here that is 20.79 FTEs in fiscal year 2026 alone. How does this square up with the MPCA's agency and with our state commitment that a top priority would be to advance environmental justice and protect Minnesotans? How does this square up and an investment in public health and environmental justice? Where is that in this bill, Rep. Heintzeman?
Chair Heintzeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Koslowski. Here again, I'm going to sound somewhat repetitive, but the goal here is to give regulated parties someone to go to and have their questions answered to protect Minnesota's air, water, and land. And having that information as a regulated party is really key, is what I'm hearing from stakeholders, in accomplishing that goal of protecting.
Thank you. And again, quick follow-up, or I can go to Rep. Pinto for some closing comments.
Yeah, I do have a follow-up. Thank you, Chair Baker and Chair Heintzeman, actually. I'm just going to follow up on the specifics of engagement with tribal nations. I do actually want to know, what has the two-nation consultation look like? And out of the 11 tribal nations, do you have any resolutions of support or anything in writing that says that they've been consulted or their opinions on the proceedings of this bill.
Chair Heintzeman.
Thank you, Chair Baker. So Representative Kozlowski, as I continue to point out, I'm going to be available to anyone, and there have been a number that have come to my office of tribal nations and been available throughout this entire process and will continue to be.
Lead Pinto.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to have a couple motions. We've got a few minutes, Mr. Chair?
Thank you. Yes, we
Okay,
do. Yes,
Okay, yeah,
thank
I just
you.
want to check for time. Okay.
Just if we lose one of our representatives and you want a roll call, we just need to make sure we recognize.
No,
that.
of
So
course.
Thank you.
No,
Yep.
that's fine, and I'm happy to work with you on that, but if
Thank
we
you.
have a couple minutes. So, and Mr. Chair, you had referenced earlier that this bill had been fully vetted in the Environment Committee, and I'm thinking that if an employee came to you and said, hey, I've got a great idea for the business, and described the idea, and you said, well, how much it's going to cost? And they said, well, I actually don't have that information. I think you'd say, well, that's not fully vetted, my friend. So this was, in fact, not fully vetted in the Environment Committee. There was not a fiscal note available, and this was, there's $24 million of spending over 4 years in that area. It's obviously not in our area, but Mr. Chair, we have got significant federal funding uncertainty and issues, and it is, as I said before, I don't think that folks will be able to identify, and please, if you're able to, let me know, a situation where under the DFL majority of the last 2 years that bills were voted out of committees, budget bills, where there was not a fiscal note available. So I believe Representative Greenman, since I cannot make a motion, Mr. Chair, will have a motion relating to referring this bill to the Environment Committee.
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Chair Baker. For all those reasons and the fact that it does not have the appropriation in the bill or account for it, I'd make the motion to re-refer it to the Environment and Natural Resources Finance and Policy Committee so that that committee of jurisdiction, your committee, can actually adopt the appropriation and vet it and do all the things that Chair Pinto or that Lead Pinto said. And I'd ask for a roll call on that.
Have any roll call being seen? We'll do a roll call on the motion to re-refer back to environmental concerns. The chair will vote no against that.
Meckland.
No.
Bakeberg.
No.
Berg.
Yes.
Frazier.
Yes.
Greenman.
Yes.
Hussein. Pete Johnson.
Yes.
Wayne Johnson.
No.
Kozlowski.
Yes.
Mueller.
Mueller votes no.
Schultz.
No.
Zalesnikar.
No.
7-6, that motion fails. Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And then the second motion, Mr. Chair, relates to the fact, so that was in somebody else's committee. Members, especially for the folks who are new here, our committee is going to be, we are responsible for the budgets for DEED and for DOLLY. We heard from Bureau of Mediation Services, et cetera. Members, we are going to get an updated forecast. We're going to have budget targets. Especially given the federal environment, given the chaos in Washington, given the, and I appreciate, Mr. Chair, you having signed that letter to Republicans in Congress, but they just passed budget targets that could have a huge impact on our budget. It is not responsible for our committees to be passing through spending at this point until we know what the actual budgetary picture is. And spending in the tails, I've heard so much from my Republican colleagues, by not sending back to environment, we've got this money at more than $12 million MPCA. So in any case, Mr. Chair, we should not, members, be advancing this at this time. Really nothing to do with the substance of the bill. We should not be acting on this bill at this time until we actually know our full budget picture, or else we are going to greatly regret it later on when we have to make significant cuts, or if we have to make significant cuts. So, Mr. Chair, Representative Greenman will have a motion.
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think for all that and from this discussion today, it's not even entirely clear, I think, to the side of the aisle that we don't have it that we don't already have an office, indeed, that is doing this work. So appropriating a amount that does not either meet the fiscal note or potentially have a need, I think would be irresponsible in addition to the macroeconomics that we're talking about and not even having a target. So with all of that, I'd ask move to lay House File 8 on the table, and I'd ask for a roll call.
Thank you, Representative Greenman. Roll call has been requested. Again, I think that this is an important issue. We got to keep it moving. I want to keep this moving on to Ways and Means. So with that, the chair will oppose not to support the motion to move forward, and we'll do a roll call. Baker, no.
Meckland.
No.
Bakeberg.
No.
Berg. Frazier,
Yes.
Greenman,
Yes.
Sane, Pete Johnson, Wayne Johnson,
No.
Kozlowski,
Yes.
Mueller, Schultz,
No.
Zeleznikar.
Members, that motion fails on a 7-6 vote, so that motion is not going to pass. Further comments, anybody, members? Hearing none. Closing comments, Representative Heintzeman.
Thank you, Chair Baker, and.
Before we take the final vote.
In the spirit of our schedule today, I'll just say thank you again for taking the time to hear this bill and to provide members another opportunity to take a look at this. And I thank you for your support, members.
Thank you, Representative Heintzeman. Again, the chair will move to pass and re-refer House File 8 as amended on to the Committee of Ways and Means. Members, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. The bill is on its way to Ways and Means, House File 8. Thank you very much. Member, that concludes our work today. We will see you back on Tuesday, 8:15 a.m. This meeting is adjourned.